Hey everybody, Fetty here. You know, the one tool in my shop that I use by far more than anything else is my miter saw. When I was building this house, I just set stuff up everywhere in this shop. I didn't have any organization to it or anything. And I had my miter saw on actually a really nice contractor type stand, and it served my purpose, but the problem is it took up a lot of space. Now, a few years ago, I picked up a Fine Woodworking magazine. I think it's issue 209. And in that, they had this modular, movable, fold-upable type miter saw station. And I've really been wanting to build this thing. Well, I finally found a round to it, and I decided to go ahead and build this thing. Now, in my research leading up to this, I came across a guy who had actually drawn this up in SketchUp, and he'd done a really good job. So I'm going to have some links where you can go over to his website and where he has that SketchUp model. You could actually build this project off of his model without even having to have the plans. Now, there's a lot of things about this miter saw station that I really like, and it's kind of hard for me to decide what my favorite part is. But one of my favorite parts toward the top of the list is the ability to fold this thing up and to move it around and to find a nice corner to stick it in when I'm not using it. And what that's going to do is it's going to free up space in my shop, and it's going to allow me to put another cool toy in here. Now, one of the other features that I really like about it is the ability to use this Kreg hardware and these Kreg accessories like this stop. I use stops all the time in the projects that I do, but the problem is a stop to me is a block of wood and a clamp. Well, these Kreg production stops are going to give me a whole lot more accuracy and confidence when I do my project. So I'm really enthused about, having this on here. Another pretty cool feature of this miter saw station is it's got onboard storage for your shop vac. I have a big dust collector and I use it most of the time, but it's pretty cool to be able to have a small little shop vac in this cart, so when I move it around to different places in the shop to set it up to work, I don't necessarily have to drag this big dust collector out and drag that hose around and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's a pretty cool feature. Now, this isn't a project you can do in a day. This is a good long weekend going at it as hard as you can. You build this thing from 2 sheets of 3/4 inch plywood, so you don't have all that much money in the wood. But when you go to buy your Kreg accessories and your casters and all that kind of stuff, it kind of adds up. So, you're probably going to have $200, $250, give or take, in this project. But you'll have a really nice cart. So I think it's a pretty good value. So I wanted to show you how I built this thing. It's time to get started. So I spent a couple of nights this week, and all I did was just cut out the parts so that today I could just put this thing together. And what I'm going to start with first is this base. Now, one thing that I want you to keep in mind is I'm building my base just a little bit bigger than the plan calls for. I've got a really big miter saw, so I scaled mine up about 1.5 inches. So in the plan, it calls for the top to be 30.5 inches wide. Mine's 32.5 inches wide. So as we go through this project and I call out dimensions to you, I'll call out the dimensions from the plan first and then try to remember to tell you exactly what I did mine as. Now, the only thing that it affects is this base. So that's all you got to worry about. And if I forget to do it, just remember I'm 1.5 inches wider than the plan calls for. Now, in the plan, they're actually joining the parts together just using wood screws. Actually, I think they're using drywall screws, and that'd probably work just fine. I kind of prefer using pocket screws. I think that it makes a little stronger connection and all that. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use wood glue and pocket screws. Now, the downside to that is it's going to take me a little more time. I've got a whole lot of pocket holes that I got to drill. So let me go ahead and start drilling those pocket holes, and I'll come back and show you how all this goes together. Now, on the top and bottom of this cabinet, there's an overhang. And what I'm going to do, I don't want these sharp, hard, square edges. So I'm going to measure up about 1 inch off the corner and come in here with my square and just mark me a 45. Then I'm going to take that over to the miter saw and just clip that off, and it'll make a nice, smooth little appearance on the top and bottom of this cabinet. So let me go ahead and do that. this back panel of this cabinet has 3 2-inch holes drilled in it. One is to give access to your vacuum port. The other 2, I guess, are just airflow. Now on the top of the back panel, dead center in the panel and 3 inches down is the center point for that first hole. And there's just one right here on the top. And on the bottom, it's 3 inches in from each corner is where the center point of the other hole is on this corner. And of course there's one on this corner too. It's a 2-inch hole, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to chuck the hole saw up in the drill press and drill these out. Now the front panel of this cabinet also had 2 holes at the top, just like in the back, 2.5-inch holes, and there again they were set in 3 inches on center from each corner. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my trim router with a 1/4-inch roundover bit and just go around these holes there and knock the edge off. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start building the perimeter of this box. But before I do, I'm going to tell you some dimensions. The table bottom, the bottom piece here, the plan calls for 22 deep by 29 wide, and mine's 22 deep by 30.5. Now, the table, or the cabinet back, the part that's going to go right here, on the plan, it calls for 27-inch tall by 25 wide, and mine's 27-inch tall by 26.5. And the cabinet sides, right here, they're the same as what the plan calls for. It is 27-inch tall by 21.5-inch wide. Let me just make sure. Yeah, 21.5-inch wide. And the table top, the plan calls for 22 inches deep by 30.5 inches wide. Mine's 22.5 inches deep by 32 inches wide. So I think, oh, and the other thing is, on the front of the cabinet, there's this little stringer that's going to hold it in place. And the plan calls for 4 inches tall by, let's see, 25 inches wide. And on mine, it's 4 inches tall by 26.5 inches wide. So I think those are the only deviations from the plan that I made. So what I'm going to do is start building this perimeter. I think the way that I'm going to go about this is I'm going to lay my pieces up. You can see I got my pocket holes drilled. Now the side pieces run on the outside of this seam, so I'm going to lay some glue right here. And I'm going to put my side piece on, get it all good and lined up, and I'm going to pin it with an 18 gauge, and that way I can come back and clamp it. One of the problems with using pocket screws is when you run that screw in there, especially if you've got some glue in that seam, well, it'll make it want to shift a little bit. So that's why I want to get it pinned and clamped real good so that when I screw it down, it's not going to move. Now once I get the perimeter of this box built, then I'm going to lay it, get it situated on the bottom part of this cabinet and get it lined up the way I want it, and then go ahead and attach the bottom to it. So it's going to be kind of tough for me to do this by myself, but I'm going to do my best to kind of show you how I'm going to go about it. So let me get started. I'm just going to put a smidge in here. Really with pocket holes, you don't really need to use glue, but it's my project and my glue. And this is how I'm going to do it. So I'm just going to get them lined up real good. I'm going to pin it with this 18 gauge. Now I'm going to get a couple of clamps on here to hold her in place real good. Now I'm going to come around front and get that little stringer in the front. And now I can go ahead and start running my screws in. May be tough for you to see, but I've got pocket holes about every 5 inches. And I'm just going to run the screws in. Now I've got everything lined up on this base. This is the front. And right here on this little nub hanging over, it's about, I don't know, it's about 3/8, give or take. And on the sides, there's a lip of about 1.25 inches, maybe 1.25 inches light. Now in the back of the cabinet, this back piece is lined up kind of flush to the edge of that round over. Now one thing that this plan called for is having this stringer and this back piece set in about 3/4 inch. And I just really couldn't see any reason why to do that. And I knew that it would cause all kinds of aggravation. So mine's coming up flush on these edges right here. That's just the way I did it. You can do it however you want to, but I just figured trying to set this thing in 3/4 inch and get it lined up, and I don't know, I just knew that that was going to be a problem. So mine are flush, and this, you know, the edge of this plywood looks kind of crappy. The only thing I can figure, the reason the plan called for it is just to kind of give it a little bit of character or something, but I may come in here and edge band this or something, but that's the way I did it. You do it however you want to. At this point, I just need to go around the bottom and screw those pocket screws in, and the bottom will be attached. So here's the front of our cabinet, and our front piece will lay in just like this. I'll come in here and put a cleat along that bottom so you can only push it in so far. And then in the top, I'll put a magnetic latch behind that to kind of hold it in place. So I think that's going to look pretty good. Now I've got the top pinned on, and the way that this works is there's about 2 inches of overhang about on each side, and about 1/4 inch right here on the front. And on the back there again, I've got it flush to that round over. So what I'm going to do is flip this thing over, get the rest of the screws in the top, and then I think I'll go ahead and put the casters on it. I didn't have a real good organization to it. And my miter saw, but the problem is I usually, I didn't have a good, some of the Craig accessories, like the stop. Now there's a lot of things about this miter saw station that I really like, but one, it's hard to, I just set stuff up every, 31 and a half, nope. Daggone it. So that today, spitting, piece is out of line. That's not what I wanted to say. I don't know how to show that. Honey, do I look fat?